We are very delighted to introduce our final keynote session with the Honourable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, in conversation with Adrian Rocca, Chief Executive Officer, Fitzrovia Real Estate. Please join me in welcoming Premier Ford and Adrian to the stage, and a big thank you again to Fitzrovia Real Estate for sponsoring this morning's session.
Thank you, Premier, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. I think we have a great room in front of us and looking forward to our fireside chat. The Premier is the 26th Premier of Ontario and currently represents the riding of Etobicoke North. Prior to his provincial victory, Premier Ford was elected to Toronto City Council, where he represented Ward 2, succeeding his late brother, Rob Ford, former Mayor of Toronto. As City Councillor, Premier Ford voted to privatize garbage pickup west of Yonge Street, reclassify the TTC as an essential service, and also eliminated the vehicle registration tax. Since being elected June of last year, the Premier was very busy enacting a number of policy changes that directly impact our industry. We're going to dig into those shortly, but firstly, Premier, why did you decide to get into politics? It seems like staying in business, especially after a successful business career, would have been an easier road.
Well, first of all, man, thank you for having me, and I just want to greet everyone. Boy, what a crowd back there! My goodness. Why we got into politics? I guess it's a family thing. We've been very fortunate as a family. Worked hard in the private sector, and it started with my dad. It started with my dad back in '95. I came home, and he used to complain. You know, he'd watch the television, and at the time, Bob Rae was in power, and the NDP, they were, jacking up the taxes and increasing our debt. And he used to say, the socialists have taken over, we got to get out of here, and this and that. So rather than move, I went to the local riding association and put my dad's name in the hat to run as a PC candidate in 1995 under Mike Harris. And I went home and I told him, I said, you're going to be a candidate rather than complaining. Get out there and do something about it, because we were always involved in the federal and provincial party. And he said, there's no damn way I'm going to be a politician. I can't stand politicians. And sure enough, he won the nomination, fortunate enough to win the election. And then Rob jumped into politics, and I spent almost 20 years going back and forth building our U.S. division in Chicago. And I'll never forget, one day I was in Chicago, I was driving along, and Rob called me up and said, at this time he was a councillor for 10, 12 years, and he said, Doug, I'm going to run for mayor. And I thought, oh boy. He says, but I need you to come back home, and you have to run as a councillor in Ward 2. And I said, Rob, I can't give up the business and just move up to Toronto full time and ignore our business in the U.S. And sure enough, by August of the election was in October, August of that year, he convinced me to kind of jump on board and ran, and we were fortunate enough, and so was Rob. And then during the I guess when Rob got ill, literally there was an hour left to see if you could run or you couldn't. And I wanted to do my best to carry on the great things Rob was doing in the city. And then we weren't fortunate enough. It was close. We had about 5 weeks to put a campaign together and run. And then I was traveling around, the same situation. I heard there was an opening at the party level. I guess a few things happened with a previous leader, and I thought, let's jump in there and change the province. Our province was bankrupt. We lost 300,000 jobs under the previous administration. Debt doubled in 15 years to $347 billion. We're the largest sub-sovereign debt in the entire world. And if you put that into perspective, I talk about Rob. Rob would always say, don't talk billions of dollars. The average person doesn't understand billions of dollars. Sorry. And so to put it into perspective, we're spending $1.5 million an hour on servicing our debt, $36 million a day, and $13 billion a year. Our fourth largest line item on our budget is servicing our debt. And when we went into office, the first thing you do, you go into a bankrupt company, you start looking through the books, and surprise, surprise, there was $15 billion deficit as well. To give you an idea, the previous government was spending of your money, our money, I should say, all of ours, $40 million a day that they didn't have. Just think of that, trying to run a corporation that you're spending $40 million or more than what you were taking in. And so we went in there, and I always say we have the best team I've ever seen in 30 years in politics. And we have two, Parm Gill, MPP, Jim McDonnell is here as well. They're two of the all-star team members. And we have a real talented group, and I'm so fortunate to be surrounded by such quality people.
You've been incredibly efficient in your first 12 months of government. What are some of the accomplishments you're most proud of?
Well, first is we were all part of this, our whole team, driving efficiencies. And, you sit back and you listen to a lot of folks and the news doing cartwheels about, oh, they're cut. No, we're driving efficiencies. There's no one that's going to convince myself or our team that there isn't waste in the municipal level. I've been there, done that. On the municipal side, when Rob and I walked in the office, the first thing we were told is there's $774 million of pressure going into the year. Well, rather than saying we have to raise taxes and go to the province and the whole shebang, we went in there. Not only did we find $774 million of efficiencies, we delivered a 0% tax increase. And we did the same at the province here. We went in there and we found $3.3 billion of efficiencies right off the hop, bringing our $15 billion deficit down to $11.7 billion. And we reduced the debt by $4 billion just by refinancing some of the money that we went out to raise. So that's one area, because everything in this province evolves around budgets and money. The second is, I would say, jobs. There's three important things to our government, three top priorities, is maintaining healthcare. We increased healthcare by $1.3 billion. I'm going to repeat that, $1.3 billion. We increased it from the previous administration. The other area is education. We've increased education. Now, listening to the news and listening to everyone getting excited out there, the truth of the matter is, and go online and look at the budgets, we increased education by $700 million. Those are staggering numbers. Even though enrollment over the years has dropped in students of 108,000 students, I think it went up 1,000 or 2,000 last year, but overall it was well over 100,000 students less. The previous administration hired 11,000 new teachers. That doesn't add up in my world. I'm sure it doesn't add up in your world. If your sales are down, per se, do you go out and hire more employees? The answer is no. But even in saying that, we still put a fund together of $1.6 billion to keep all the teachers. And it's kind of mind-boggling why they're acting the way they are, but we're going to get that resolved with Minister Lecce. He's doing a great job. And one of the most important things, we always say health is the most important, which I agree, but our jobs. Previous administration, as I said, lost 300,000 jobs. And I always say government doesn't create jobs. If government starts creating jobs, we're all in trouble. But we create the environment for companies to thrive and prosper and grow. And let's unleash companies, get the government out of the way. Rather than all the red tape and regulations, there's over 175,000 regulations. How do you do business? So we put a SWAT team together, I call it a little SWAT team, to go after all the regulations. We're going to cut 25% of the regulations by 2020, just to start, because there's so much duplication between the federal government and the provincial government on the red tape and regs. And I ask each and every one of you to help us. If you see unnecessary regulations, contact my office personally. Contact the minister's office personally, because we need your support. Because nothing stifles business more than unnecessary regulations. So since we created that environment, there's 174,000 more people working now than a year ago before we took over. Those are staggering numbers. That's 174,000 more jobs. Our biggest challenge right now, Adrian, when I travel across the province, our economy is booming. I always say we have the smartest and brightest people in the entire world right here in Ontario. We can build anything, absolutely anything here in Ontario, and we're doing that. We're short. Economic development came up to me, and I could feel it, because no matter if I went to a mom and pop shop or a medium-sized or large Fortune 500 company, we're short people. We have a massive labor shortage. And when was the last time Ontario had a labor shortage? They gave me numbers of anywhere from 200 to 250,000 people. Those are staggering numbers. You know, you look at our trade with the U.S., if we were a standalone country, we would be the United States' third largest trading partner. We do $390 billion a year two-way trade with the United States. Again, staggering numbers, because we have the brightest and best people. They just need to get the government out of the way, let companies thrive, because when companies thrive and prosper, the employees thrive and prosper. And when they thrive and prosper, communities thrive and prosper. And that's what we focus on, listening to the people.
Talking about communities prospering and thriving, your government has taken a very strong stance on encouraging new housing supply. Why is this such an important issue for you?
Well, it's absolutely critical. And Adrian, you and I had a chat before we came out here. It really affects everyone. Do you know what it affects? Almost every single person, but it affects those people outside, the servers, that are paying too much for rent, or can't afford a house. They just can't afford it. I have 4 young daughters. If I didn't help my oldest daughter, she wouldn't be able to afford to even buy a townhome out in Milton. And Milton's a beautiful town, by the way, but a little ways out of the city, and cost a fortune. I think the townhome was $700,000-800,000, a townhouse. So how does a young couple afford that? It simply comes down to supply and demand. Again, the previous government, they were anti-development. You know, they were against development. We're pro-development. We're pro-business. Because when you're pro-business, pro-development, and you have more supply out there, it's a no-brainer. The market starts leveling off. So we have to get more supply and, again, make it easier to get permits. I lived through it. I walked a mile in the municipal shoes of all the permits and the runaround that developers get. It's unfair. And so our goal, our ultimate goal, is to work collaboratively with the municipalities, because they control a lot of the permits, and have a one-stop window shop of 1 year. You get your permit. You look at down in the U.S., you go down to Texas or other places, you can get a permit in 6 months. You know, you can get a pipeline permit in 6 months down in Texas. Why can't we do it in Canada? It's just, it's a lot of unnecessary bureaucracy.
I just want to push on that further. Where do you think the previous government fell short on encouraging new housing supply? And maybe specifically talk, I think everyone in the room have been at the coalface of LPAT backlog and some of the additional hoops that you mentioned we've had to jump through in order to get production, in order to get new housing supply into the market. Can you just dig into that further?
Sure. Where did the previous government fail on all aspects? And I'm not even being sarcastic. It's true until you get in there and you see. I'll give you an example. We have a backlog with LPAT's 100,000 units right here in Toronto. That's 100,000 families that could be living in a condo or apartment or a house. And so what we're doing, we're putting a surge. We're getting more people, trying to get through the LPAT process. We have a real top-notch person that's a chair now that's going to move it forward and cut out all the nonsense. You know, I've heard nightmare stories about getting permits. One is this turtle story, and I'm sure, I don't know if you've heard the turtle story before. They come in, and don't get me wrong, endangered species are very, very important. You take care of them. But there was this turtle, and they held up, 1,000 homes being built because there was a turtle somewhere. No one found the turtle, but they had to build a culvert until the turtle and get to the other side of the road. But not only did they have to build the culvert, they had to put illuminated lighting inside the tunnel until at nighttime the turtle could see where he was going. These are true stories. But it's just, or previous government looking at an area and just putting a swipe of green across it and saying, okay, that's green space, no one's building. It just, it's their ideology. It's different than the way we think. We believe you get more supply out there, it's gonna, again, level off the market a bit. And where are we gonna put? There's 100,000 people coming in to Toronto and the GTA area every single year. And when I heard, and you were telling me that, or someone was telling me in the back room, that the municipality or the city doesn't think there's a crisis, I don't know where they've been. There's a massive crisis out there for housing and rental units, and making sure that we free up the market on rental units as well. Again, you go back, you see some of the costs of the rental units. On new builds, we did some great things on new builds, allowing the market to dictate rather than letting the government dictate. It should be the market that dictates the cost.
Yeah, totally agree. Minister Clark's Bill 108 came out this past spring. How have these policies stimulated the supply of rental housing? I would say from my personal experience, institutional capital certainly feels re-energized in this sector, and that's a positive thing, encouraging more supply, getting more supply into the market. But love to get your take on it.
Well, I agree. It's just, again, we're just cutting down the burden of getting permits. That's what the backlog is. I mentioned the LPATs. That's just in Toronto, 100,000 units. Right across the province, it's absolutely staggering. Just moving everything forward in a rapid pace, but a responsible pace, with consultation with municipalities, increasing density around transit stops. It's the old not in my backyard scenario, but we're putting $28.5 billion into the largest transit project in North America, finally building rapid transit, not a Toronto base, but a regional transit plan, and making sure that where there's a transit stop, the developer will pitch in on the subway line and give them density. And that's what we need to do.
As someone who's done more for industry in such a short span, what could we be doing as an industry group to help further this agenda?
Well, I appreciate that. I guess just getting the word out there and telling the people that we are on the right path. I always say, my friends, are we better off? This is the old Ronald Reagan scenario. Are we better off than we were a year ago? We're a little better off. We're 1,000 times better off in every single ministry. No matter if it's a debt or deficit or housing or health care, we're investing $144 billion into infrastructure. I'm massive on infrastructure. 90 billion of it is going to transit, roads, bridges, highways. 27 billion is going into new hospitals. I think 27 or 28 billion into new schools. So we're really focusing on infrastructure, and that's what drives the economy, in my opinion. When I talk to companies, and I was speaking to one of the larger financial institutions, the CEO came by the office yesterday, and they're moving people from around the world. And I've heard, this isn't one conversation, I've talked to many companies. And my job as Premier is to sell them on Ontario. And the number one issue with these large companies coming to Ontario is the quality of life. Compared to London or New York or LA, I said, you have the brightest pool of people in the world right here, some of the greatest universities to draw from right here in Ontario, and the quality of life trumps everything else. So we have to make sure it starts with housing. The CEO said, I got to have affordable housing for the employees that I bring. And that's where it starts. Starts right at, you go down and dig deep into root cause. You got to have affordable housing, because the first thing that came out of his mouth was, my people can't afford to live in New York. They can't afford to live in London. So come to Toronto and outside of Toronto. You know, it's a little less expensive, but still, it's a great quality of life for their families.
Premier, we just want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Really appreciate the candid conversation. I think as an industry group, we appreciate the government reaching out and engaging with the private sector. And I think collectively as an industry group, we'll, you know, I do believe, think very positively, we'll figure out this housing crisis. Thank you very much for collaborating. We look forward to working together with you.
Well, thank you, Adrian. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out today. We're very grateful as a government. We look forward to working with each and every one of you, and please send in the ideas. I'm a strong believer, Adrian, is nothing's worse than a bunch of politicians that don't understand any industry. It doesn't matter if it's a development industry or not, trying to dictate to another industry what they should be doing. And our philosophy is the other way around. No matter if it's a healthcare or any other industry, development industry, you folks are the experts. You know better than what we know. And we get input from stakeholders like yourself. We work together in a collaborative way. There's no better place than Ontario. Our province is absolutely booming right now economically, and we just have to keep this pace going. And again, thank you and God bless you. Thank you.